the loss of Tshuvah by the Rambam. One of the elements of Tshuvah, both as a means to accomplishing Tshuvah and also as a consequence of Tshuvah, is calling out to the Creator to be merciful and forgive the sin that has been committed. And the Rambam here is quoting the Talmud, and it says, even though Tshuvah and calling out to God are desirable at all times, during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which of course include Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they are even more desirable and will be accepted immediately. As it says in this passage we saw a few days ago, seek God when he is to be found. And the verse goes on, call out to him when he is close. Which means that God doesn't have the same relationship to the world all the time. In some sense or other, he's more close to the world, to people in general, to the Jewish people particularly, during the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur than he is the rest of the year. One explanation of how this applies is the following. Remember, we said Tshuvah means to return. And to return means I used to be someplace, and I've become distanced from that place, and I want to go back to that place. In general terms, I used to be connected to the Creator in a certain way, in a certain type of relationship, and that relationship has become attenuated. I want to go back to that closeness and connection with the Creator. But there's a particular detail as to how the distance is created, which has a far-reaching effect. Let's suppose a person commits a transgression in January. His committing the transgression removes him from that spot of closeness to the Creator. After all, he's now acted on a motivation. Let's say this is a deliberate transgression. He's acted on a motivation which he knows opposes the will of the Creator. So, mentally, spiritually, experientially, emotionally, he's taken a step out. And our sources tell us that simultaneously, God also takes a step back. He also takes a step back. Because this person has, in some degree and in some respect, rejected God, and God responds by removing himself also. So there's a double distance between the person and God. Now let's say he does Tshuvah in February. That's nice. It's good. It's a mitzvah. And he will have closed the distance from his side. It doesn't automatically follow that God will close the distance from his side. It doesn't follow. It might happen. It might not happen. What's special about the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is that he closes his side first, even before you do Tshuvah. Call out to him when he's close. Seek him when he's found. That means to say he's close before you call. He's found where you are before you seek him. What does that mean? That means he's closed the distance from his side. Now suppose a person does Tshuvah. He's closed the distance from his side. Now there's zero distance. That's what it means when it says it's accepted immediately. It's accepted immediately because the remaining distance depends only on the person. So this is I would say a gigantic gesture on God's part to say, usually if a person has committed a crime, he has to change himself and rectify it to the extent which he can before he deserves closeness to the Creator. That's the way it is the rest of the year. But Tshuvah, the 10 days of Tshuvah, Baruch Hu says, even though you don't deserve it, I'm closing the distance from my side. So that when you do Tshuvah, it'll be over. That's a symptom of God's caring for us even at a point where we don't really deserve it. And there are many other such symptoms. We have the two famous holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment, pure judgment. God sits in judgment on the whole world, tallies up the actions and what the consequences should be. Yom Kippur is a day also of judgment, but that's the day of Tshuvah. Of course, it's good to do Tshuvah right away, but that's the end, as we'll see. It's a kind of limit on doing Tshuvah in a certain sense. And of course, when you do Tshuvah, you're blameless. Once you've done Tshuvah, you're blameless. Other things might have to happen as rehabilitation, but blame is gone. So the question is asked, why don't we do it in reverse? Why don't we start with Yom Kippur? If you start with Yom Kippur, and that way you get forgiveness for the things you've done wrong, then when you come into Rosh Hashanah and you're being judged, you'll have a very good judgment because you're clean. You've sloughed off all of the failures of the past. So the pessimistic view is, if you had Yom Kippur first, you wouldn't take it seriously. You need Rosh Hashanah and the sense of being judged and the consequences to make Yom Kippur serious enough to do the performance in the best possible way. And there's a certain truth in that. But from the point of view of a Kodesh Baruch Hu's investment in us, there's a deeper and much more powerful lesson. On Rosh Hashanah, we crown the Creator, King of the universe. There is a principle, Ein Melech B'lo Am. There's no king without a nation that makes him king. This doesn't mean, as a 6-year-old might think, well, of course, if you're all alone and you don't have anybody with you, you can't be king. Who are you king over? That's not what it's talking about. I'm not talking about what 6-year-olds could understand. It means that in the Jewish concept, Melech, king, is a position that the subjects give to the ruler. If they don't give it to him, he hasn't got it. You can be a dictator, you can be a ruler, you can be a master, that's a matter of power. God has all of those. But you can't be a melech unless the people accept you as melech. On Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish people stands to, so to speak, perform the coronation of the king. In traditional Yiddish, it's called the day of the coronation, the coronation. So here's the message. God says, and by the way, Rav Moshe Shapiro Zichron Livracha writes this in one of his Sfarim, the very fact that God chooses the title of Melech means that he's making himself dependent upon us to put himself in that position. It's something he can't do for himself. Because the definition of a Melech, a king, is someone whom the people accept. And by the way, you may have heard that there's a Jewish principle, you have to follow the laws of the land in which you live. There is such a principle. Many authorities say that's only if the laws of the land that you live in are legitimate. And they're only legitimate if the people have accepted them. The government is something which the people believe in and are committed to. So there is this idea that legitimate authority requires acceptance. Not in all cases that's true, but in many cases it is true. So here, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I'm setting up a day of the year where you're going to perform this coronation and make me king by accepting me as king. Okay, now, I make this day before Yom Kippur, which means you may not have done Tshuvah yet, and you may not have been forgiven yet. So you're wearing stained clothing. You're coming before me with your failures still intact. And still, I want you to put the crown on my head, so to speak, with your failures, with your mistakes, with your transgressions, unrepented, expiated. I think that's a gigantic statement of investment in us and trust that we will come to do the right thing, belief in our future. that he wants it to be done on Rosh Hashanah before Yom Kippur. So that's, I think, a very profound message. And he comes, then this backs up and it expands the idea that he comes before we do Tshuvah. He even wants us to put the crown on his head before we do Tshuvah. And in particular, as he's closing the distance from his side, when we do Tshuvah, the game's over. There's no distance left. Are we together? Okay. Now, the Rambam says, when does this apply? That sometimes God is more distant, and sometimes God is closer. And only during the 10 days does he close the distance first to an individual. But with regard to the community, whenever they do Tshuvah and cry out wholeheartedly, they are answered immediately. And there's an explicit verse that says so. What nation is so great that they have God close to them, as Hashem, our God, is whenever we call him? And the Rambam applies this to the idea of Tshuvah. And this encapsulates a very fundamental Jewish principle, which may not be emphasized enough. God's relationship to the community is not the same as his relationship to individuals. We, those who are affected by Western political thought and social thought, either trained or you absorb it automatically, subliminally, that, of course, the world is made of individuals, individual people, individual objects. This is a table, this is a chair, this is one table, it's another table. Not the same table, it's a different thing. And groups are artificial. Groups have to be created. There's nothing substantial, particularly about a group. If we choose to associate them, we can talk about them together. If we don't, we don't. And certainly groups of people, a number of people living in proximity become a group only if they choose to make it a group. If they choose to commit themselves to it, then it will have a group status. If not, not. There's nothing natural or inherent about the idea of a group of people. That's a tenet of a great deal of modern Western thought. There's nothing necessary about it. It doesn't have to be that way. It's not written in stone. It wasn't given at Sinai. You could regard groups as real, fundamentally real. And in certain senses, you could regard the group as more real than the individuals that make it up. Because when you talk about an individual and you ask yourself, what are the qualities of the individual? What are the roles that he plays? What are the projects which he decides to dedicate himself to or not to dedicate himself to? What does the individual regard as necessity? Many of them are aspects of the group which don't exist individually. Take, for example, the language that you speak. This was Wittgenstein's famous argument. What is a language? Well, a language is a system whereby certain sounds and certain shapes indicate certain objects, indicate certain concepts. How does Table get to be related to this? Well, the ultimate explanation is not within our grasp. Philosophy of language has its limits. But one thing's for sure, the relationship it has to this piece of furniture is because there's a group of people that use it that way. We had inscriptions from the ancient world, which were clearly inscriptions, and to us they had no meaning because nobody spoke that language. So they were just blank. And if a person says, there are no tables in this room. And you say, really? What do you mean there are no tables? Well, you see, in my private language, Table stands for radioactive iodine. So there isn't any. So what do you mean your language? What do you mean you? I mean, you can make up a code if you want, but a language is something that people communicate by. It's something that they are enabled to share their ideas with one another. And therefore it has to operate according to rules that they share. And then, since they share the rules, if you violate one of the rules, you're wrong. You've made a mistake. You can't linguistically mean radioactive iodine by Table. You can make it up as a sign for yourself if you like. But language as a means of communication means you have to share the rules with other people to whom you communicate. So language is a group object. It's a group activity. If you formulate your thoughts in terms of language, and if you affect your will by talking to others, that's a group activity. You can't do that alone. If you see the necessity of division of labor, then there have to be rules. There have to be rules that how a society of thousands or millions of people divide labor, how they rely upon one another. So without that, you probably won't survive. Individual survival, if you're cast off, and all alone, you need special training to do that. Otherwise, you just die. So if you ask a person, what are you in the world for? What matters to you? He may say, certain political goals matter to me. He may say, I desire something for my family. A family is a group. You can't have a family all alone. So a lot of what you are is determined by the groups of which you're a member. This was an Aristotelian idea. It's not stupid. It's not obviously false. It's another way of looking at the world. The Torah tells us that the Jewish nation forms an essential group. And a person's relationship to the Creator is through his solidarity in the group. There's no such thing as an individual relationship to God. And even if you'll talk about Abraham, if you go through Abraham's history, you'll see that God treats him as the progenitor of a nation. He doesn't treat him as a particular individual with hopes and dreams and heroism and so forth and so on and managing his life. No. His whole life is managed as a foundation for a nation that will come out of him. Without that connection to the nation, he wouldn't be who he is. And indeed, there is a punishment for certain very serious crimes. In Hebrew, it's called kores. Literally, kores means being cut off. And in context, it means being cut off from the Creator. There are certain things that a person can do which cuts off his relationship with the Creator. In every case but one, when the Torah is describing a crime which precipitates kores, it says he will be cut off from the Jewish people. Only once does it say that he'll be cut off from God. All the other times it says he'll be cut off from the Jewish people. Meaning that if you're cut off from the Jewish people, ipso facto you're cut off from God. There's no such thing otherwise. Now you take a minyan. 10 men have to pray together. What does that do? After all, each one's saying his own prayer. They're not even reciting it at the same time. They're saying it silently. They have to be standing in proximity. They have to start at the same moment. So what? Why would 9 not be enough and 10 is enough? The deep answer, there's a lot behind this, but the deep answer is that the 10 function as a microcosm of the Jewish people as a whole. Or in modern terms, they function like an ambassadorial group. Let me explain what I mean. Let's suppose that the British ambassador to the United States calls up the Secretary of State and says, how about tennis on Saturday? And the Secretary of State says, sorry, I'm busy. Now contrast that with the British ambassador calling up and saying, I have a message to deliver to you from my Prime Minister. And the Secretary of State says, sorry, I'm busy. That's a matter of another dimension altogether. That's an official insult of the United States government to the British government. Because when he invites him, when he announces that he has a message for the Prime Minister, that's a representative of the state talking to the representative of another state, not just private people who could play tennis. Similarly, when 10 Jews get together, the Creator treats this as an ambassadorial visit from the Jewish people. And God has commitments to the Jewish people as a whole that he doesn't have to individual Jews. So, you get in, I get in by being part of the Jewish people. That's why when we pray the official prayer, all the prayers are in the plural. I don't pray to God, give me or help me or I say. It's all we. because I'm speaking for the Jewish people as a whole. So this is an illustration, these are the illustrations of this general idea, which the Rambam says here. The idea of Tshuvah, if the Jewish people will do Tshuvah as a whole, they'll be answered immediately, because he's committed to them in a way that he isn't committed to the individuals. For the individuals, Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur is set aside. Another example of the same idea, the goal of life is Dveikus. Yes, Dveikus is the name of a famous Jewish band, but it's not only the name of the band. Dveikus means attachment. And it means a kind of psychological, emotional, spiritual attachment. Indeed, the first place where the word for Dveikus occurs in the Torah, does anybody know where it occurs? It occurs in Genesis, where it says that since woman was made from man, when a man gets married, he should detach himself from his parents and attach himself to his wife. The dovak beishto. That's the first time when dovak is used in the Torah. The dveikus of a man and wife. That's the kind of emotional bond that we are talking about. Now, to achieve that bond with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, there are very many degrees. We spoke a few moments ago about the fact that when a transgression is performed, that sets up a distance, that attenuates, it weakens the dveikus, the connection between man and God. Tshuvah repairs it. The stronger the dveikus would be, the more successful a spiritual life a person has. Of course, to make it really strong requires a lot of preparation, a lot of work, a lot of effort. And when you think of it as a process, it's a daunting process, and it's a long-term process. The Kodesh Baruch Hu says, yes, it is a long-term process. To achieve a solid, continuous attachment to the Kodesh Baruch Hu is a very long-term process and difficult, but I'll give you times of free dveikus, free attachment. Wherever you are in life, wherever you are in your development, and prayer is one of them. The Ramchal says this in the Derech Hashem, the way of God. So you wake up in the morning, you haven't done anything yet. You haven't done any mitzvahs yet, usually. You come before Kodesh Baruch Hu, and Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. Here are some minutes that we can spend together, and you can be connected to me. And that's how you start your day. You start your day with free dveikus. Because Baruch Hu says, here, I want to show you what the possibilities are. I want to show you what's available to you by giving it to you free. And then there's the middle of the day and the end of the day when it repeats. The Kuzari says that prayer is food for the soul. If you're hungry, if you're actually malnourished, so you're weak, you're dizzy, you can't concentrate, you tremble until you get a meal. The soul also needs strengthening, and the strengthening is a connection to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it's given to you free in prayer. So here, it depends upon how you pray. If you pray as an individual, it's in a certain measure. If you pray together with 9 others, then it's in a much greater measure. Because he treats the 10 in a way that he doesn't treat the individuals, because the 10 stands for the entire group. So that's just background and further information on the idea that during the 10 days of repentance, that's special for the individuals, but not for the group. And what I hope that you'll pick up on is that these principles have very general application to very different areas of life, very different times of life. The same basic principles apply over and over again, which means that there's a certain continuity in your experience of Torah, your experience of learning Torah, and there's a certain organization in your understanding of Torah. It isn't just a lot of facts. You know, it's not like reading the encyclopedia, and certainly not like reading the telephone book. I used to say to people, you know, you tell me you're interested in everything, did you read the encyclopedia? And if they say yes, then I say, did you read the telephone book? Every line is another fact, isn't it? Another brand new fact. A fact you can't learn from the previous lines. They're all independent facts. Why don't you read the telephone book? I actually met one person who said he did. How many Smiths are there? How many Schwartzes are there? Where do they live? But it isn't like that, because if it were fact after fact after fact, it would be hopeless to think of having a view of how it works and a view of the whole. But it isn't like that. It's very highly organized. So it's interesting to hear, to sort of catch on to principles that repeat over and over again, because they're very helpful in understanding. So that's what the Rambam writes in the top paragraph here. The small 3 lines I'm going to go to later when we start the first chapter, so I'm going to skip them for now. We're together so far? By the way, I want to mention to you, tomorrow, on Mondays, I have an open Q&A at this time. So on any subject that interests you, if I'm competent, I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. Okay, now he says something which I mentioned a couple of days ago, and we have to be very careful here. Tshuvah and Yom Kippur only atone for sins between man and God. For example, a person who ate forbidden food, or engaged in forbidden sexual relations, and the like. However, sins between man and man, for example, someone who injures a colleague, curses a colleague, steals from him, or the like, will never be forgiven until he gives his colleague what he owes him and appease him. Now, we have to be very careful here, because I think others disagree with the Rambam and the way that he puts this here, but what he says is this. If you do Tshuvah, you did Tshuvah. You succeeded in performing the mitzvah of Tshuvah, that alone won't necessarily get you forgiveness. If it's between man and man, you have to rectify what you did. Which means that even if you don't rectify what you did, you accomplished Tshuvah. This means that for between man and man, it's Tshuvah plus. It's not built into the Tshuvah itself that you rectify what you did in the past. Tshuvah itself is enough if it changes your attitude towards the future. But, of course, the purpose of doing Tshuvah, a purpose of doing Tshuvah is to achieve forgiveness for what has been done in the past. That won't happen unless you add to the Tshuvah also rectifying what has been done. I could hear someone say it differently. Yeah.
What if you rectify what was done, but you don't have forgiveness?
Don't have what, sorry?
Don't get forgiveness if you don't do Tshuvah. Can you rectify without Tshuvah?
Yes, certainly you can. For example, let's suppose somebody stole something, and he found out, what do they call it, an alpha tag or something?
Air tag.
An air tag, yeah. He hears through the grapevine that the owner put an air tag on it, and it's an invisible air tag, and it's to the inside or something, right? And they're just they're out of town at the moment. When they come back, they're going to trace it. He might think of giving it back. He might. He hasn't done Tshuvah. Next time he'll check whether there's an air tag before he steals it, and steal again. So that's not doing Tshuvah. Tshuvah means committing oneself not to repeat the transgression, and regretting it, and confessing that to God. He can rectify the damage without that. Let's say he did something.
Getting forgiveness from the person.
He certainly won't. All right, getting forgiveness from the person. He can even ask forgiveness from the person, but he won't be forgiven because he hasn't done Tshuvah. Let's suppose a person did something anonymously, and that's where he thought he could get away with it. But now he's been discovered. Well, he figures, my best way to avoid criticism and punishment and everything else is to admit it and to say that I regret it and to give it back and to ask the last person for forgiveness, because otherwise I'm lost. Well, he's giving it back and he's asking for forgiveness, but he hasn't done Tshuvah at all. He won't get forgiveness for that. You've got to have both. But the I would say a bit of a novel idea here is Tshuvah means to return to the place where you had been before and become distant from. And you've done Tshuvah, so if I've gone back to the place, how come I'm not being forgiven? Here, he's splitting the relationship with God from the relationship with man, and he's saying that Tshuvah really only applies to your relationship with God. But God's principles of forgiveness are, it's not enough to repair your relationship with me. You also have to repair the damage that you've done to another person. Now, yeah.
Just look on that. If you steal something and return it before the person even realized it was stolen, do you have to confess to him, or is this now between you and Hashem, and you don't tell him anything about it?
I can't answer definitively because I don't remember seeing it written in those terms, but your logic, I think, is correct. If he doesn't realize that it has been taken, and you return it, and then he subsequently never found out that you had used it, I don't think you have to ask him for forgiveness. Forgiveness is only when he's not forgiving you. He's angry at you, and he wishes to harm you, or would be happy if you were harmed, that sort of thing. It's to repair the relationship with the person. You don't ask for someone forgiveness if he's not condemning you in any way. And I would go a step further. Even if he does know, sometimes asking for forgiveness provokes him. Let's suppose you know that he won't believe you. So asking him forgiveness just says, see, not only did you steal, but you're a liar also. That doesn't accomplish anything. That doesn't, that won't repair anything. When you know that admitting to the person is going to provoke him, then you have to ask a shayla. You have to ask a Jewish scholar whether you should or you shouldn't. For example, here's an example where it works double. Suppose someone stole something from a store and wasn't caught and wants to return it. But of course, to return it means to identify oneself as a thief. So one suggestion is return it anonymously. Return it anonymously. How do you return it anonymously? Well, here's a clever thing which I heard from my Rebbitzin. You go into a store, you take something off the shelf, you buy it, pay for it, put it in your pocket. Another occasion, you go into the store, and when no one's looking, put it back on the shelf. So you now have given them an extra X, whatever it is. They'll use it, don't worry. The fact that it doesn't have a tag on it, whatever, they'll use it. So in that way, you have actually returned the item. And that way, you've repaired that. Are they angry at you? They don't know who you are. Are they angry? They may be, but if they keep an inventory and see there's an extra one, that may even assuage their anger. So, okay, there are lots of cases like this. I was living in Baltimore, and Rabbi Heinemann, who for 50 years has been giving a halacha shir, maybe more. And Heinemann.
Heinemann in Cincinnati.
Yeah, it's a pretty widespread name. Moshe Heinemann. There was a chain of clothing stores called Corvettes. And there was a store in Baltimore, and a lot of people shopped there, and they had a credit card. He happened to say in a shir, by the way, Corvette stands for Korean Veterans. But really, the title is longer. It's 8 Jewish Korean Veterans. And there was a gasp in the audience because people had run up credit there, which means essentially you're borrowing money from Jews. Well, you're not allowed to pay interest to Jews. You're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to ask for it, they're not allowed to take it, and you're not allowed to do it. But they have credits on their credit cards. If they don't pay it up, there could be very serious consequences. So here's what he suggested. He said, look, when you pay the bill on your credit card, send in 2 checks. One check for the balance, the plain balance, and one check for the credit charges, for the interest. And in the letter, write to them, I as a Jew and you as Jews are really prohibited from taking interest. This check is a check for the balance of the debt that I owe you, and this check is a check. Do with it as you please. If they keep it, that's their business. But he's saying, I don't regard myself as obligated to pay it because the Torah doesn't allow me to pay it. But, here's the money, do with it as you please. So you have to be very careful when you, in terms of interpersonal relations, how you handle these things. These laws are general principles, but if you are in a complicated interpersonal situation, ask a rabbi about it, because I can't give you rules because every situation is different. Just point out that it's a sensitive area. So, but now let's imagine a situation where Reuven steals a book. And the book is sitting on the shelf. And he says, I stole it. What's the matter with me? The Creator doesn't want me to steal. Nothing really belongs to me. It all belongs to the Creator. We have to follow His rules. I feel terrible about what I did. And I'm never going to do it again. I've committed myself not to do it again. And I confess it to God. Yes, I confess it. Yeah, but Reuven, what about the book on the shelf? Oh, I'm not giving that back. I'm not giving it back. Who's talking about that? I'm just talking about the future. How could you call that Tshuvah? How could you say he really regrets taking it if he's not giving it back? In a certain sense, he's still holding on to the stolen property, so in a certain sense, he's stealing it again. He's stealing it every day. Shouldn't returning the property be built into the Tshuvah itself? Shouldn't it be part of the Tshuvah? Shouldn't you say that the Tshuvah is not appropriate if he doesn't give it back? I've had this problem for a long time, and I discussed it recently with several people, and they told me, the pe'echad, with one chorus of answers, no, you're wrong. He might be embarrassed to give it back. The person may have moved to Cincinnati and it's hard to get to him, or lost track of it. If he's not going to do it again, if he regards what he's done as wrong, the fact that he doesn't give it back doesn't cancel out the fact that he realizes that it's wrong. He's not going to do it again, and he confesses it. So it could be a separate item. So I felt better about it. It's not obvious that you have to see it as part of Tshuvah itself. But this is what the Rambam says. The Rambam says that if it involves somebody else, it can't be done unless you go to him and repair the consequences. Now, as you'll see, this is going to be attenuated bit by bit. And he stresses again that restoring the money is not enough. He must appease him and ask him to forgive him. And even if it was just words, he has to go and approach him repeatedly to achieve forgiveness. Now, what happens if the person goes and says, listen, I stole it, here it is. Here it is back, I'm sorry, I feel terrible about it, I'll never do it again, please forgive me. And the guy says, no, not forgiving you, I hate you. I hate you for having stolen it. What should he do then? So the Rambam gives explicit instructions. If his colleague does not desire to forgive him, he should bring a group of 3 of his friends and approach him with them and request forgiveness. In other words, you bring 3 of the friends of the victim. Now he's admitting it in public. Remember, we spoke the other day about admitting your sins between person and person in public because you are suffering public humiliation. And that testifies to your sincerity, to the sense of recognition that what you did was wrong. And here, you're doing this, you're asking the injured party for forgiveness in front of 3 of his friends who see that you really mean it because you're publicizing it. And that presumably should put pressure on the friend to say yes. If the wronged party is not appeased, he should repeat the process a second or third time. 3 times with 3 friends. If he still does not want to forgive him, he may let him alone and need not pursue the matter further. He's done what he's required to do. And on the contrary, the person who refuses to grant forgiveness is the one considered the sinner at this point. And he's going to elaborate this in detail in a moment. But there's a hidden condition here, which I think the Rambam is taking for granted. I'm a chassid of the Boston Rebbe, who was nifta 13 years ago. I spent a lot of time in Boston. And one Elul, someone who knew me as a chassid of the Rebbe's, came over to me and said, this year the Boston Rebbe is not going to be forgiven on Yom Kippur. I said, really? Golly, how do you know that? Who are you? He said, I'll tell you why. Because I did something against him, and I went to him, and I asked him for forgiveness, and he refused to forgive me. And the person refuses to give, he himself won't be forgiven. So I said, can't be. I know him well. I can't, it's not possible that he refused to forgive you. He said, sure he did. Go ask him yourself. So I said, I will. And I did. I said to this guy, met me on the street, he told me this interaction. And he said, you refused to forgive them. And the Rebbe said to me, I did refuse to forgive him. So I thought, I'm missing something. Why did you refuse to forgive him? And he said, because he wasn't sincere. He didn't sincerely mean that he had wronged me and that he was guilty. So I didn't forgive him. Oh, so it's not just a matter of mouthing the words. It's a matter of meaning it. And later on, I thought to myself, dope, you could have figured that out yourself. He's going around publicizing that the Rebbe won't have forgiveness this year. Is he really feeling guilty for the thing that he did? Is he really feeling contrite? Not really. So, when it says here that you have to forgive, it's only if there aren't serious doubts in your mind as to the person's sincerity. But if you think he's just mouthing the words, then you don't have to forgive. Now, the Rambam says, the above does not apply if the wronged party was one's teacher. If he's your teacher of Torah, then in that case he should do it even 1,000 times till he forgives him, because the transgression is a much more serious transgression, and because the teacher's judgment is certainly taken as the guiding factor here. Now he elaborates on what we said above. It's forbidden for a person to be cruel and refuse to be appeased. Rather, he should be easily pacified and hard to anger. This is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. People who are hard to anger but easy to pacify, that's a very, very great spiritual condition. It means they're hard to anger, and if they give in to anger, part of them doesn't want to be angry. Part of them realizes the negativity of anger, both for themselves and for the other person. So they're looking for some way to dissipate the anger. That's why it's easy for them to be appeased. The person will do the least thing to indicate that his sincerity, and the anger will disappear. That's the way that a person should be. He should forgive with a complete heart and a willing spirit. Even if he angered and wronged him severely, he should not seek revenge or to bear a grudge. Those are prohibitions, biblical prohibitions. Lo sikov lo sitor, that one shouldn't seek revenge or bear a grudge. This is defined in the Gemara as follows. Let's say Reuven asks Shimon, please lend me your shovel. And Shimon says, what? Lend you my shovel? Go away. Drop dead. Don't need you. So Reuven is very upset. Won't lend me a shovel. Next week, a timid knock on the door. Shimon knocks on Reuven's door. Could I borrow your shovel? Well, now, how's Reuven going to feel? You? I just asked you last week to borrow your shovel, and you said, no, you threw me out. I should lend you a shovel? Not in a million years I wouldn't lend you a shovel. That's called revenge. You didn't give to me, I'm not giving to you. That's forbidden. Biblically forbidden. Lo sitor is where he says, oh, Shimon, you're asking? Watch. You didn't give me, but I'm better than you are. You're a rat. You're cheap. But I'm not like you. Here, take my shovel. That you can't do either. You're not allowed to do that. So this is the sense in which you have to be able to get over what happened. Now, Notice that here, the Rambam doesn't say anything about forgetting that it happened. That's a different matter altogether. For example, if a person injures someone in a certain way, he may say, look, even with the best of intentions, this person is dangerous. So, I don't want to take chances of being injured again. So he may curtail his trust in him, his reliance upon him. That'll be okay. It's not a question of forgetting the fact. And we'll see later where the Rambam will talk about the transgressor, whether he should forget what he's done. If he's been forgiven, should he forget what he's done? And the Rambam says, no, he should not forget what he's done. So here he's only talking about forgiving him, holding no grudge against him, not having a negative attitude towards him. This is the path of the seed of Israel, the upright spirit. And non-Jews are not characterized by this wonderful trait. Now, okay, let me finish this off, and then because I have something else I want to say here. If a person wronged a colleague and the latter died before he could ask him for forgiveness, he should take 10 people and say the following while they are standing before the colleague's grave. I sinned against God, the Lord of Israel, and against this person by doing the following to him. What's going on here exactly? He's going to do Tshuvah, but the fellow died. One element in doing Tshuvah is asking for forgiveness. He's dead. He can't do it now. He can't do it now. Notice what happens. They come to the grave, and he says, I sinned against God, the Lord of Israel, and against this person by doing the following to him. It doesn't say, and Reuven, please forgive me from the grave. Please forgive me now for what I did. It doesn't say that. He's not asking for forgiveness. What the Rambam is saying is, if you can't live up to the normal requirements of Tshuvah, then you do what you can. And if you do what you can, then it's enough. We spoke about this a couple of days ago. We talked about resolving never to do the sin again on your deathbed. Yes, I'll never do it again in the next 2.5 hours. And we said, one could have thought of that as trivial, not significant enough to play a role, but it is. It counts as Tshuvah. Here's another example. Or, let's say you owed him money, and the guy died. So you should give it to his heirs. That's not the same as giving it back to him, but it's the next best thing. Well, now what about if he doesn't know where he is? Doesn't know where the fellow is, doesn't know where his heirs are? Do we say, well, it's a rule of Tshuvah, and he can't do it, so he's missing out. He's not doing Tshuvah because he didn't do what the rule says. No, he can give it to the court. You say, listen, I stole it from so-and-so. Here it is. If anybody should come and ask for it, you can identify who they are, give it to them. I don't want to hold on to the stolen money. I want it to be available so that it conceivably could go back to the people to whom it should go. So you do what you can. There's more examples of the idea that Tshuvah is like charity and not like tefillin. You know, in tefillin, if any letter in the parchment is broken, it's not tefillin. The charity, if you give 50% of what you're supposed to give, that's a mitzvah. And then you have to give the other 50%, but it's not as if you give it, it's either all or nothing. It isn't like that. Tshuvah is not like that either. Now he says he should forgive him. Forgiving is really psychological. It's a question of not holding it against him, so to speak. That might be hard to do. After all, let's say you did it purposely, intentionally. He did that to me. He embarrassed me in public. Embarrassed me in public? How could he do that? So there are various techniques for doing this. And this is, as a spiritual matter, this is quite important for keeping your own spiritual balance and for the ability to live up to this aspect of Tshuvah. And in life before something terrible happens. So one should try to do this. And there are two ways to do it. First of all, when you see something happen, you may not know the circumstances. Rabbi Samet and his Rebbitzin here wrote a book, The Other Side of the Story, True Stories where the circumstances were so impossible to anticipate, and you hear them, you think, do I really know what's going on? There was a case of two people who were friends, and they crossed paths one day, and the one friend was about to greet the other one walked by without even noticing. The person thought, what? We're such good friends? Just walked by? How could that be? Did I do something wrong? Did I cross the other person somewhere? No. I didn't do anything wrong. Well, that's the way he feels. That's it. Forget it. I thought we were friends, but we're not friends. Resolved. That's the end of the friendship. 6 weeks later, their paths crossed again. Same guy. The guy comes over. Oh, hi. How are you? I haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? And he thinks, what's going on here? 6 weeks ago, you passed right by me without even saying hello. You think I'm a dope? So after the conversation starts, he says to him, you know, what happened 6 weeks ago? I saw you 6 weeks ago, and you didn't even say hello. He said, 6 weeks ago. Oh, I didn't tell you. My identical twin brother was here from America. Bang! It wasn't what he thought at all. This wasn't what he thought at all. The incident that he thought never happened. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Maybe I don't know what's happening here. That's one thing. Maybe he had false information about me and he's acting that way to me to correct it or whatever it is. Number two, even if he knew what he was doing, what kind of pressure is he under? I was in my Rebbe's base medrash in Boston, and one day, I'm finished with this. One day, a guy walked in, a guy whom I knew and the Rebbe knew, walked up to the Rebbe and started yelling at him in public, yelling and saying nasty things. I was I was devastated and on fire, so I pushed myself between the two of them, facing the other fellow, and pushed him out the door. I came back, and the Rebbe was totally calm. Totally calm. I said to the Rebbe, how do you do that? You know, if I had been in your shoes, the other guy would have been dead by now. And the Rebbe said, I know what's going on at home. I thought, aha. Maybe the other guy isn't just evil. Maybe he isn't just, irresponsible. Maybe he's suffering. Maybe something's going on that pushed him. Now, I have a rule. I wouldn't say it's a 100% rule, but maybe it's 98%. Someone who causes pain is in pain. People don't just go around causing pain to other people. Could do it accidentally, but I'm talking about purposely. Person who causes pain is in pain. So the first thing you should think is, poor him. Poor him. If he's striking out like that, he doesn't have a happy life. And feel pity for him instead of anger. And if you feel pity for him, it's much easier to forgive him. Some of this comes from the writings of the Rabbi, Nachman, and others. It's very difficult, and one way they put it is, in order to get you in the right self, in the right mood, think of how you rationalize your own faults. Yeah, I know I did it, but look, I was tired, and I owed money, and so hurt me, and I was recovering, and you have lots of excuses for yourself. Well, take them out of your pocket and use them for other people also. Of course, you don't know his life that well, but it could very well be. Could very well be. There's one fellow who was very talkative, didn't realize that when there's a conversation, his half was 95%, and the other guy's half was 5%. And it bothered me. I spoke to somebody, he says, maybe his wife doesn't listen to him. I thought, wow, yeah. If he's not getting the kind of listening ear at home that a person needs, he may be desperate for a listening ear. And okay, I find it uncomfortable, but now I'm going to pity him and try to help him if I can, and not feel badly about it. So it's another spiritual art to be able to find explanations for people and to help forgive what they do, so that you have this quality that the Rambam describes of the Jewish people. They're people who forgive. Okay? Tomorrow is Q&A.